Hi, my name is Devlog and I'm the lead engineer on Trade and Transit. I wanted to talk a little bit today about how and why we made an interactive tutorial for our game. Early on in playtesting, some people let us know that they were feeling fairly, confused about what they were doing in the game, why they were doing it, and how well they were doing. It turned out that they just didn't have a good understanding of the internal mechanics of the game, which makes sense because they didn't build it like I did. So, as a bit of remedy for that, my colleague Emma and I set out to make an interactive tutorial that essentially holds their hand through actually doing the entire game loop and then sets them free into the game seamlessly. So, I'm going to first show you the actual tutorial system that we made, and then I'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how we made it. So this is Trade and Transit. So first we are launched into this monitor interface, which gives the player a quick how-to on how to move around and basically just tells them a few critical things. We have gotten some feedback that people find it very annoying that they can't skip this text. However, it's ironic that they are also in a tutorial. So, I don't know. I think you gotta read a little bit. Okay, now we are in the actual tutorial, and I'm going to set this full screen. Okay. So, the first thing that you can notice is down in the bottom left corner of my screen, a little tooltip has popped up. This was an auxiliary system that I had to build to facilitate the actual UI system so that you could tell the player things that were happening. It turned out to be really helpful in a variety of ways because we were able to display messages about what's happening in the game world at the same time, but the primary reason that I made it was for the tutorial. So it's basically a queued system where other game objects or mono behaviors can send a message, and the message is either conditional or timed. So a timed message, which we'll see a little bit later on, is one that just pops up and then goes away, right? Conditional messages actually have to be cleared by doing some action. So the one that we have right now that says place a printer won't go away until we do exactly that. So if we go up to a machine slot here, you can see the only one that we can choose is a printer. I think that when you're making a tutorial, it's really important to make everything extremely clear. Like, it would have been way easier to have these two buttons just stay lit up, but that wouldn't be super clear to the player what was happening. So I went the extra mile to make these actually non-interactable, which was not as easy as it should have been, and but this one stays interactive. So, place a printer. We're gonna do that. Fantastic. So the next conditional pops up right away. It says put one of our crops into the printer. So in our game, you turn crops, which are like bioplastics or corn, into 3D printed parts. The parts go into cryopods to maintain them. The cryopods spit out nitrogen, which you put into a greenhouse, which spits out corn, which goes back into the printer. So it forms this neat little recycling triangle, right? So we're going to go ahead and place one of our crops into this printer, and it's going to start working. And now it's going to tell us to place a cryopod. You'll see that this machine slot wasn't there a second ago. Oh look, our parts are done. Fantastic. This wasn't there a second ago, so this comes back around to making things extremely clear for the player. It wouldn't have been as clear if you had a choice of 4 different machine slots. Instead, by disabling all of them, and only having one in the room that you find immediately, the player has no question about what's happening and where they should go, right? You'll also notice that these doors, which are typically active during play, are all locked right now. You can't fly through them. So we've just really limited and put up some guardrails around what the player can do. So to place a cryopod, we'll go ahead and do that. Put our 2 parts into the cryopod. Awesome. Now we're going to place a greenhouse. And we will put 6 nitrogen into the greenhouse, but we don't have 6 nitrogen. Well, as soon as the player turns around, they can start seeing the cryopod spitting some nitrogen out. So, logically, we're just going to go pick all of those up. Awesome. Now we have 6, so we can fulfill this conditional. You'll notice it only says 5 because one of them immediately goes into the machine's production to start being used. Oh no, a printer broke. Okay, so this teaches the player that machines can break. And we used a special condition to force this machine to break on right away when we told it to, rather than making them actually work and experience that naturally, right? Thankfully, fixing your machines is as simple as just hitting repair. Awesome. Now the game is asking us to upgrade a machine. This is an important part of gameplay because otherwise your machines would all just kind of be dinky and they wouldn't do a whole lot. But by upgrading them, you can make them a lot faster. You can also make them spit out more product. So while that isn't explicitly explained to the player, they do figure it out, right? I mean, if you assume if you do upgrade a machine, it gets better, right? The exact details of how it gets better, we decided weren't so important for a 10-minute demo where the player doesn't really have quite enough time to worry about those intricacies, right? But they're still good enough to make a big difference in that time. So, we're going to click that. Awesome. Now, we set the player free for a minute to continue working. So we're just going to load all of our machines up. Oh, I don't have any more. All I have are crops. Okay, now I have some parts. My colleague Emma did a really great job with these UI interfaces and making sure that they have a ton of player feedback in them, right? You actually have a sign up here that tells you when the machine is empty. You can see the progress of its current production routine. You can see its durability and its capacity. And all of these things change as you do things with the machines. Maybe I'll upgrade this one. Okay, I guess a minute has passed. That was fast. Go upstairs, it said. So that was a timed notification. Now we have another conditional that says make 500 credits. And here's the bridge of our game. But that's not what this video is about. So, make 500 credits. Okay, well, nitrogen is the logical one to sell because it's worth 70. Awesome. Okay, make a debt payment. Now, this panel popped up. It wasn't there before, and we did that on purpose because when the player comes up out of this hole, you want the first thing that they see to be the thing that they need to go interact with, right? So, in this case, disabling this whole statistics and debt interface is important to guide the player up the stairs. And then when you tell them to make a debt payment, naturally they're going to look around because nothing here says debt, right? You can't make a debt payment here. So they're going to turn around and hopefully notice this. I had a little bit of a plan to rotate it towards the player as they move around, so it's just a little bit more inviting, but I just haven't gotten around to that yet. There's a lot of other things to do. So we're going to make our debt payment. Alright, now, this was another important part of our tutorial. Originally, it just kind of launched you into the game and started the timer, but we also got feedback that players didn't really know when they had stopped being in the tutorial. So what better way to tell players that something has happened than put it right up in their faces and make them click a button. So as soon as you click this, you're in the actual game. You're still in this little trade zone, so if you want to come back and sell some more things, you can. But pretty quickly, the planet leaves, and we're going to enter warp speed here shortly. You'll also notice that everything down here was unlocked. These other doors were unlocked. Oh, wow. That's a lot of stuff. And hopefully, after a tutorial like that, the player has a pretty decent grasp of how to get started. You know, they might not know everything about the game, and that's okay. You want to leave some things for them to discover, but you also don't want them to be frustrated and confused trying to figure out how your mechanics work. And as you can see, now we're in warp speed. Another funny thing is that we've gotten the feedback that people are confused what warp speed is. It's nothing. You're just going through space and warping. It doesn't change anything. But that isn't explicitly explained, and so I think people wonder, especially because there's a little tutorial pop-up that happens. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty of like how we're doing these things. So in Unity, I decided that the best way to handle a tutorial was going to be in a big, long coroutine. The reason being that coroutines have the ability to hang while the rest of the program continues running, right? So we have this application where you want the player to get stuck at a conditional while the game continues to check for that conditional to be met, and then once it is met, they can pass through that gate, essentially, right? So in our main scene, we have the tutorial handler. The tutorial handler is literally nothing. It's just an empty game object, but it has this script on it, and this script has a bunch of references to important things, such as the doors that we lock, the machine slots that we are going to incrementally activate, and then the machine selection buttons for like buying the machines themselves, and I guess the buttons associated with those, right? Inside of this script, you can see my big long code routine. So up at the top, we have some really basic stuff, reference to the game manager, a check interval, etc., etc., and then a few of these fields which help us not only control things. So these are like control fields, and then these right above this are fields that help us track what stage the player is through the tutorial. This is a dictionary, which essentially holds a list of all of your conditions. So, down below that, we are setting the tutorial up, just doing some basic things that happen as soon as you launch into the tutorial, and then we are going to be starting the tutorial code routine. This is called elsewhere. This is actually called when you press the start button out of the original monitor that you're looking at, so it isn't called within this class. But this code routine is the bread and the meat and potatoes of what is happening, right? So once this code routine starts, we get launched into a while loop that runs as long as the game manager's field in tutorial evaluates as true. So the first thing that we do is set the tutorial up, and then we have some wait for seconds that start to occur, and these just provide a little bit of padding between each of the notifications that pop up, so things feel a little bit more natural. Inside of this, we have several regions where we are sending conditional notifications, like place a printer, and then starting a quick while loop. And this while loop is going to run until this value of the conditions dictionary evaluates to true, right? So while the condition placed parts machine evaluates to false, continue to wait for seconds, the amount of seconds of which is equal to the check interval, which in this case is 0.2. And so that's running 5 times a second, which is maybe even a little bit faster than it needs to be, but it seems to be snappy and doesn't really seem to consume too much computing power. So that's what I landed on. Then I have some debug statements in each of these that are just helping me understand like where we are in the tutorial, because this was surprisingly hard to debug and there were a lot of edge cases and issues that I ran into, and these are just really helpful to pepper through your code when you know something is going to be a little bit tricky. Finally, after this while loop finally breaks and evaluates to true, we do the debug log, and then we send the command to close the current conditional notification. Now, um, this isn't like, I am maybe like an agnostic, it might be the right word, command that we're sending. It does not care what the conditional notification is. It has nothing to do with this condition here. It just says close the current conditional notification. So if I show you my shoot, what's it called? The tooltip system, or it's not the tooltip system. It's like the pop-up it's the notification system. If I show you the notification system really quickly after this, you'll understand that this is just closing the current conditional. So then we're waiting for seconds, telling the player to load a crop, and as you can see, all of these are basically copy and pastes of the same thing, with words changed, conditions changed, etc., etc. When we get down here, things change a little bit because we need to be toggling certain buttons true and false and then turning them back on. Like right here for the upgrade buttons, we are turning only one of the machine's upgrade buttons on because we're telling the player to upgrade the printer specifically and not any machine. And then as soon as that's done, we want to turn all of them back on so that the player has freedom to experiment with the knowledge that we've just taught them. That's really most of this. Particularly towards the end of the tutorial, there's some really important game flow control that we had to do. Namely, making sure that you unset up the tutorial and unlock everything that you've messed with, and then making sure that all of your game manager fields and properties are set correctly so that when you launch into the game, you don't get weird bugs, which you're always going to get some weird bugs, but you can minimize them to some extent. The rest of these are just helper methods that kind of do things that I've already talked about. And then this stuff. So these conditional toggles, as you'll notice, are all public methods. They're called from elsewhere in our code base when that condition is met, right? So for example, in machine behavior, this class gets launched. Actually, this might be the wrong one. Hold on. I think it happens in machine slot. Yeah, okay, it happens right here. So when you click the machine slot and then you press a button to launch a machine or spawn a machine or whatever you want to call it, we are making a call to, well, first there's this if conditional, right? If the game manager says that we are still in the tutorial, this code will fire and activate, right? So if we're still in the tutorial, then the game manager is going to make a call to the tutorial handler and then activate that method, placed crops machine, placed parts machine, placed nitrogen machine, etc. Making sure that these are called and then those conditions in our condition dictionary are set to true, which in turn causes these while loops to evaluate to true and lets the player move on from that stage of the tutorial. It is so important to control this closely because you can run into a lot of ridiculous bugs if you're not careful about that. So the last thing that I wanted to show you was maybe the notification system. I don't think I have it pulled up here. This is a little bit outside of what I wanted to talk about, but it is closely related to the rest of this. Okay. So this notification tab, this is doing a few things. There's some features in here which aren't strictly necessary, but one of them being that when you get a notification, it has a little bit of motion to it, right? So if I play the game right here and we get a notification, you'll notice that it not only pops into the screen, but it actually goes a little bit farther up and then down and in. It kind of like snaps into place. Let's see, we'll probably get one in here in just a second. Right, right there. So it goes, when it leaves, it just goes straight down, but when you get one, that's going to take a minute, but when you get one, it kind of pops up and then snaps into place. Uh, Additionally, we're actually using a queue here, a queue of enumerators. This was a little bit difficult to figure out, and it might be overkill for your use case, but it worked for me. I find C Sharp's implementation of like a stack to be really lackluster and kind of annoying, but a queue is what did the job here. So we have different methods for receiving and starting conditional notification coroutines and timed notification coroutines. Anyways, that is what I wanted to share with you today, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something. And make sure to check out our game Trade in Transit, which will be releasing on itch here shortly in the next week or so. And then, with any luck, we'll put it on Steam too. So, thank you very much, and have a great evening. Bye bye.